Okay, so for today, we're going to prove trigonometric identities from left-hand side to right-hand side. That is our goal. Minsan talaga, kailangan muna nating patunayan o kailangan muna natin may patunayan. First, we start with this example. How do we establish the following identity? Cotangent x plus tan x equals secant x times cosecant x. So, it's important that we recall our identities, starting with the left side. Others have to copy exactly the given expression for the left side, but magtitipid tayo ng konti ng steps. So what we're going to do is utilize this already. So for the left-hand side, we're going to replace our cotangent x by the expression that we see on this right side. Let me get my laser pointer. So using this, we're going to have our left-hand side written as cosine x over sine x to replace the cotangent x that we have here. And then the tangent x will be replaced by the quotient sine x over cosine x. Ayun, so to proceed, we make this single fraction by getting first the LCD, which happens to be just the product of sine x and cosine x. So for the numerator, since the LCD just happen to be the denominator's product, what we just have here is the product of these two. So we have cosine squared x. And then for the second term here, we have the sine squared x. Notice that cosine squared plus sine squared is just equal to this one. So we can utilize this identity that we have here on the right, this one below. So what is cosine squared plus sine squared? It's equal to 1. So we can just replace this by 1. So what we now have is 1 over cosine x times sine x, which we can actually split into these two fractions, 1 over cosine x over 1 over sine x, which makes us recall these two reciprocal identities. Okay, so what is 1 over cosine x and what is 1 over sine x? They are secant x and cosecant x respectively. So, ayun, kamukha na siya ng right-hand side natin. So, that is equal to the right-hand side and we're done. Let's have this one. We have sine to the fourth minus cosine to the fourth equal to 2 sine squared x minus 1. Notice that this is more complex than the right-hand side. So again, we will be starting on the left-hand side. But instead of rewriting this again, we just write an equivalent version of this already para medyo makatipid sa first step. Although some have this style again, no? Yung left-hand side will just copy this and then and so on and so forth. But for this time, we make use of our algebra since this is a difference of two perfect squares. We know this is a perfect square since this is being raised to an even power, same as this one, raised to an even power. So this is a difference of two squares. So our left-hand side will just be equal to the sum and difference of their square roots. So square root nito is sine squared, square root nito ay cosine squared. So sum and difference of their square roots. Again, notice that for this one, we can make use of the Pythagorean identity. One of the Pythagorean identities that we have is right here. So sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. So we can readily replace this factor by 1. So kung 1 yun, ibig sabihin na matitira lang sa left-hand side natin is sine squared x minus cosine squared. Ito na lang. Okay? So, sine squared minus cosine squared, ito yung target nating expression. Dapat walang cosine squared. So, gamitin ulit natin to. We'll be expressing cosine squared in terms of sine squared. So, it's like moving this to the other side. We write cosine squared as 1 minus sine squared. Okay? Ayun, so we can just simplify this using our algebra. That will be 2 sine squared x minus 1, which is exactly our right-hand side. And we're done. Okay, this one, how do we establish the following identity? This is more complex than the previous ones that we have proved. You may pause on this slide and try this example on your own. But to proceed, say we are tempted to cancel the sine theta. Oops, that's a very common mistake among students, no? So, you notice, hindi nga siya pumarehas dun sa right-hand side. So, talagang mali, no? Hindi lahat ng madali o minamadali ay tama. So, be careful with our cancellation. Sabi nga, lahat ng bagay na minamadali, kadalasan ending ay mali. Kadalasan lang naman. Okay? Yung tama. Okay? So, ang left-hand side natin, notice that I group this last two terms of the numerator. Ginroup ko yung cosine theta minus 1. Since preceded by the minus sign, mag-iiba yung sign nila. So, the cosine theta becomes positive and the positive 1 here becomes negative kasi may negative tayo na nasa unahan ng group nila. Okay? Tapos, kailangan nating maging cosine lang yung nasa denominator. Ito yung target natin na expression. Dapat alam natin yung target natin kasi yung goal natin. Ganun naman sa buhay. Dapat alam mo yung goal mo na tinatarget. Okay? So, dapat cosine lang yung nasa baba. So, that means kailangan nating masimplify to. So, kung plus to, kailangan nating mag-multiply ng minus version niya. Okay? So, we have to do the same thing for the numerator, parang as if we're just multiplying by 1. So, we're not changing the value of the given. Okay? So, this is our multiplying factor na very harmless, again, kasi this is just equivalent to 1. So, again, you notice yung numerator natin, tsaka yung factor dito ay parehong-pareho lang. So, it's like squaring that expression. Tapos ito, parang yung kanina nating example, this is a sum and difference of two numbers. So, we can just square this one. So, we get the sine squared and square this expression. So, we get that expression being squared. Okay? Now, what happens is we're going to apply our simplification using our algebra. Ayan, so first term, how do we square this? Diba? First term is the square of this one, square of sine. Second term will be twice the product. Since this is a minus, that will be negative 2 sine theta times the cosine theta minus 1. And then the last term will be the square of this. So that will be cosine theta minus 1 quantity square. Now for our denominator, we just have to copy this sine squared. And then we will be squaring this. But we have to be careful kasi may minus tayo doon. So wag muna natin siyang labas sa grouping symbol. We have minus. So square muna tayo. We have cosine squared theta. Twice the product, we have minus 2 cosine theta plus the square of the second term. Okay. Yun, dito tayo nag-stop. Now, to proceed, what we're going to do is group this and this one. Okay. So, what we have is, since sine squared plus cosine squared is equal to 1, what we have is 1 plus 1, so that will give us a 2. Okay? So, notice that we arrive at this expression when we square this, and that is exactly the one that we have here on the denominator. So, yung square nito, parang ito lang din. So, ayun siya. Okay? So, in case you're wondering, now we have a 1 coming from sine squared plus cosine squared, that is 1. Then, another 1 here, so that will give us a 2. Okay, so what we have is 2 minus 2 sine theta cos theta plus 2 sine theta minus 2 cosine theta. Notice that we already distributed here the 2 sine theta. This one will be negative. Okay, this one times negative 1 will give us a positive product. Okay, and then minus 2 cosine theta came from there. Okay, so now to proceed, what happens is, yung ating numerator, kinumbine natin yung 2 with the 2 cosine theta, and the second and the third terms were grouped together. Okay? So, ayun. Ito yung ating expression. Okay? So, notice that we can group this and this one. Okay? So, to come up with this. This has a common factor of 2. This has a common factor of 2 sine theta. Okay? So, yung group na to magiging 2 times 1 minus cosine theta, while this group has 2 sine theta times 1 minus cosine theta. Okay? Notice also that you have your sine squared theta on the denominator, which can be expressed as 1 minus cosine squared theta using our Pythagorean identity. Why are we doing that? Kasi gusto natin sa baba walang sine theta. So that's why we express that in terms of cosine squared theta. Okay? Ayun, so notice that you have 2 times 1 minus cosine theta. Tapos dun sa second term, meron ka ding 2 times 1 minus cosine theta. So that means those are your two common factors for the numerator. Okay? So ang numerator natin, pinactor out natin si 2 times 1 minus cosine theta. So ang natirang other factor will be 1. Kasama nito yung 1 understood cofactor of this plus sine theta. Okay? Sa baba naman, magka-cancel yung 1 minus 1. Tapos we can combine the 2 negative cosine squared theta to make it negative 2 cosine squared theta plus 2 cosine theta. You notice that you can factor here the 2 cosine theta from the denominator. 2 cosine theta is a common factor. So what you have there is 2 cosine theta. Tapos coming from here, understood cofactor is positive 1. Tapos dito may matitirang negative cosine theta. Okay? So notice yung 1 minus cosine theta, unahin muna natin pala yung 2. Magka-cancel yung 2. Tapos yung 1 minus cosine theta will also cancel out. Okay? So, what we have is sa numerator, 1 plus sine theta, pero para kahawig na siya nung nasa taas, nasa target expression natin. We make it sine theta plus 1. Sa baba, ang natira ay cosine theta, and that is exactly equal to the right-hand side. Yung gusto nating mangyari, ma-achieve natin yung goal natin. Sa anumang bagay, maganda yung na-achieve natin yung goal natin. Medyo mahaba tong proof na to, pero isipin na lang natin, may talaga na kailangan mong paghirapan bago mo makuha. Thank you for listening!